going now. Really get it going. And try not to make it spark. Spark actually takes it away. Oh, that's really amazing. And this one's pretty big. Bigger than my hand. The other one's tiny. This thing is actually getting going. If I threw some counterweights in there, it would probably get the center spinning a lot better. Yay. Too close to these drivers on the ground. Seems strong enough to hold it away from it like that one. If I just get that center one going. Whoops, wrong way. drill too far away from it. So there's a lot to static resonance that can be done. I mean, these are using basically transformers to step up electricity to a higher voltage, but it's not like high voltage that is like regular current, you know? Sure, there's sparks flying off of it and stuff, but if you got zapped with one of them, it wouldn't hurt you like too bad. It's literally like getting shocked like on a windy day or something. Maybe this one might hurt you a little bit more than that, but I've been shocked by plenty of things in here because all the things will start to charge up in the room, like any coils, like that thing over there. That thing probably will have a bunch of wireless electricity in it. If I went over there and messed with it, it'd probably shock me. Same thing with my Tesla coil. If I touch that again, I'll probably get zapped like I did last time. Not a good idea to sit there and... Plus it's raining outside, so... And I got a heater going right next to it. So that's like induction right there. And there's a lot of current going through everything right now. So it's maintaining a pretty steady speed, you know, like... For as heavy as the wire gauges are, I mean, this is a copper tube here that's not moving. The other one is 20 gauge wire. The center one, next one is 22 gauge wire. And then the third one is, oh wait, what is that, 16 gauge? Let me see what I flipping did here. Yeah, it was 16 gauge, 22 gauge, 16 gauge, 22 gauge, and 20 gauge. Or 16, 20, 22. However, you know, I kind of lightened the load as I went towards the center. The way these work is, I'll show you. You see, if there was just a circle here, it wouldn't do anything. But because you add the little emitters on the ends here, you see that one right there I soldered on? This is acting like a little thrust, pushing it that way. See how the other one's on the opposite end? Going the opposite way? It's acting like a thrust, see that? The same thing with this one in the middle. There's one there, pushing that way, and one pushing the opposite way on this side, right there. Hard to see, but there they are. And even the center one has one. This obviously wasn't easy to solder up. What I did was I soldered up circles, and then I soldered on the emitters, and then I put extra solder on these tips right here, and then drilled into the solder and placed the rod into there. The tube I just drilled a hole into, so that one was nothing. It's harder to drill into these little tiny things with little tiny drill bits, you know, with my drill here. I'm not using like super fancy equipment here to to do this stuff. I just know how to build things pretty good, so to me, building things like this is nothing. I've been building gyroscopes for some time. Well, at least I call these gyroscopes, but they kind of don't act like gyroscopes. Sense of a gyroscope is to create balance with momentum, and some of these do, the ones I make, and some of them don't. So some of them aren't very balanced correctly. That's something I'm not like 100% good at, because I tend to be like more like, I need to build this real quickly, and like I just came out here in about an hour or two. I built this whole thing, just, you know, regular wire that you get out of a packet, you know, like this. It ain't even magnetic coil wire. This is just regular hardware store copper wire, you know. It's not even anything. And the tubing is regular soft copper plumbing tubing, 1/4 inch. So that's super easy stuff to bend. This is ground wire, 10 gauge from the hardware store, Home Depot or something like that. These twists in the wire here aren't helping it at all. Matter of fact, it actually kind of makes it a little bit worse of a function. If I were to actually straighten out this wire right here and get it really close to this edged tube here, it'd be probably better. But I just had this laying around and I didn't want to straighten it out because I was using it for something else, so I don't want to mess it up too much. And it's still serving its purpose by these point areas right here. Every band down here is a very close emitting zone to create the static field right here. The other static field, since this is all one current right here, all this whole entire loop, that's to the static driver with the red wire. Its opposite wire is this loop over here. Its opposite wire is this loop. So the static driver, or the flyback driver, which is this thing right here. This is like a static driver from a television with a basic solid state Tesla coil kind of flyback driver. This is kind of like for induction. You can use these for if you added a copper tube to a thick copper tube to this, or a copper tube or copper metal. You can use this for induction and take this off right here and just hook the induction wires here to the coil, and you can heat up metal and stuff and melt metal and do all kinds of cool stuff with these drivers. But this is hooked up to a static driver from a TV. I took this out of a TV. It came with one, but it was a piece of shit. So I took one out of a bigger TV and made this one and wrapped it and hooked it into the driver itself. And I found the pin. There's a bunch of pins back here on the back. You gotta just find the right one. They all will emit a spark, but one of them will emit a bigger spark. So this one was the one. These little knobs up here, they turn, but they don't seem to do shit. So there's a secondary wire that comes out of here that I didn't bother with, but it acts the same as this wire, so you can add 3 coil system situations for induction and stuff like that. This one is this ring back here goes to this neon sign transformer. This is an old school one. It's just looks brutal, but they're really the new ones come like in littler boxes and are much smaller than this, and they produce just a little bit less current than this one. This one's 12,000 volts, but this static driver probably is close to 12,000 volts too, if not more. But you got to understand, there's not that many amps coming off of this. So 12,000 volts is a lot, but it's not like 110 electricity that grabs you. 110, 220, 480, those electricities, those currents from your house and things, those things will kill you. The current will grab you and hold on to you. This kind of current doesn't do that. This more like frickin' zaps you. But if you add up the current to hundreds of thousands of volts and then get hit by that, well then yeah, that's like getting hit by lightning. And that's kind of how this all works. You know, it works kind of like how lightning does. It's building up a static resonance of the electrons in the air until they align and use the electrons off the emitters here to create spin, create plasma itself, like lightning does. So when you want to build something or make something with plasma, you have to have little emitters on there or little points of exit, you know. That way it will work as a function. You know, you push it and it wants to turn and rotate. There's other things you can do with plasma in this sense. Like if this was all in a vacuum now, let's say I put this all into a vacuum, and this would have no air or oxygen or anything else left to stop it from having more faster rotation. And basically what would happen is it would probably incinerate this because the wire is so small, but for a quick second it would turn into a little tiny plasma reactor and collect a nice plasma field right in the center of spinning plasma. The problem is that it would get so hot that it would just melt all this stuff. So it's kind of pointless to do that. Right now it's just working as like to show the function, how you can use static resonance off simple things like these. These are not expensive. This is $30, and I think these newer neon sign transformers are like 20 bucks. And they only have 2 wires exiting. It's not like a positive and a neutral. It works a little differently. And so you just have one wire that will admit to another wire, and then that will create a spark gap. And this is what this is a huge spark gap right here, and without the spark. So I'm using the resonating spark instead of the spark. I'm using the resonating field of the electrons to move this actually around. It's kind of hard for me to explain because I didn't study any of this. I didn't go to school or take classes on learning how to use plasma or even understand current or electricity. I've only known how to do like wire up your house, like 110 electrical, and I know how to use electricity in that sense. Like I can wire up your whole house and put in a breaker panel and and run all the lighting and all the heavy duty anything, for electricity. I've done construction my whole life, so all the trades in construction I know how to do. But when it comes to this kind of stuff, it's completely just, I'm just trying things. So if I see that this driver only has 2 wires and it's acting like a spark or lightning, or it's doing something like that, I don't have all the technological terms for all the terminology for things. And probably better off that way for me personally, because I think outside the box when I'm doing this stuff because I don't know what I'm doing. So because I don't know what I'm doing, I'm able to just see things and build them without trying it. Like I didn't say, oh, I want this to work, because believe me, I built lots of things that don't do shit. And it's kind of bums you out, when you spend so much time. Like when I first built this today, it didn't work. And I kind of got bummed out. Like, oh, I wasted a few hours building this whole thing and it didn't do anything, it wasn't functioning correctly. And I realized that I needed, if it's going to be this big, I needed more static field in here. So you can't hook the drivers together because they'll short each other out. So you have to create a dual static field here. That's what I'm doing with this ring here and this loop over here, and then this ring here, and well, this ring here and this ring here on the outside. That way I'm creating the push of everything kind of like rotationally spinning right here. I have this one pushing this way with this one, and then I have the little one pushing upwards, and then this one's kind of like emitting in a weird coiled area spin of that. That's why this coil situation isn't very good for the outside. It's way better if it was just a solid, straight, circular, rounded piece of copper. That would work much better for me. I've already done this before, so I've tested lots of different ways to build these and make the static fields work for me. I always hook them up to my foot switch here because I've gotten shocked too many times, and like I said, it doesn't hurt you like super bad, but yeah, it still hurts. So it's no fun if you get zapped all the time. And I've learned to use things to make these things, like easier for myself, so I'm not like hurting myself all the time because I had to learn the hard way. Lots of things I just I just try, you know. You can see the little one inside there starting to do a nice little good spin, and that's creating the second one to spin, and that's creating the third one to start the inertia up. Now it's really working like a gyroscope. Sometimes you just knock things around, or you move things around, and slight adjustments on these make them work perfectly. Kind of why I don't have any like perfect setup in here. If I did, then maybe I wouldn't be able to do these kinds of things, because I would only have the idea in the background to only do things through a scientific way. And I don't. I think like I'm doing these things completely with a non-scientific approach, only to understand the function of how something works, like this driver. And this is the repercussion of my ideas on how I think things can move around, and inertia can be manipulated, you know. This is showing a very nice slow spin on the outside. The center one is spinning very nicely on the inside, and then the second one is spinning perfectly in balance with it all. Right now there's a very balanced field right there. And it's working like a kind of like how a real gyroscope would actually work, where the center is balancing out everything and creating inertia. It's allowing it to keep the static field going without some type of weight or oscillation in that field of vibrations. Without it being able to push or resonate something, it won't spin. There has to be some type of imbalance that makes it want to move itself, and then once that happens, it'll continue. I'm sure there's like so many other cool things that this possibly can be, you know. This isn't using tons of electricity, like I said, because I'm using 110, but it's converting that 110 volts down to DC. So it's like a lot of voltage, but it's not using that much voltage. If you can learn to harness this voltage and sustain it, and without like moving parts and stuff inside of like a star, which they've done, you know, they've made little tiny suns and little tiny stars with plasma, and they're doing, this is a physical form of what they're doing to plasma in a reactor. They're spinning plasma fields around each other with the electrons in a vacuum, and allowing them to smash into each other in a vortex or a spherical way. The natural flow of them is that anyways. It's only mirroring its own function. When you think of an atom and an electron, it's already doing this on a microscopic level. All I'm doing is copying and resonating the field of information to make it continue to do that. See, look, it finally stopped. So, without balancing everything out correctly, and you know, I wouldn't be able to sustain the correct field in here. But I mean, I'm using freaking garbage here, you know, like there's no mathematics here. And if I did use mathematics and geometry and balance and built this thing correctly, you know, I'd try to use a 45-degree angle to get each of these circles away from each other. And, you know, that should have helped it a little bit, and it seems like it does. This center ring's a little bit bent. If I straighten that out, it might help. Sometimes when I bend them and twist them, in here, if I twist this might work better sometimes, because it acts as an S shape. And once it starts doing that, it's like a wobble. And when you have things wobbling like an S, it starts to create push and movement on it, and it goes faster and faster and faster. It's like cymatics. When there's a wobble, it starts to spin, you know, and it's technically, on some cymatics, it looks like a spin, but it's technically not spinning. It's like I've explained that, like with a black hole. You may think that it's spinning, but technically it may be just warbling, and that warbling is enough vacuum to suck things into it, because it's the way when you start to fluctuate that warble and it starts to warble inwards, it's sucking pressure down into that S shape, you know, it's wave. And same thing when you see, all we're seeing is reflection of light. That's like a cymatic. So it's like you're not there in space next to a black hole, you just get sucked into it supposedly. But the reality is if you really were to be next to it or see it, it might not be a vortex spinning at all. It might be a vortex that's warbling flat, you know, like vibrating. Vibrating so much it can rip apart atoms and stuff like that. Just like we can do with certain frequencies and stuff. We can resonate the frequencies within material, and that material will fall apart. It's kind of like the Hutchinson's effects are that way. The way I think he did all that is there's a static field that you resonate, and then you have to broadcast certain other sonar or radio frequencies into those fields to actually stabilize the lift. You are using the broadcasting as a frequency range to control the static field within itself. That kind of is, I don't have the proper broadcasting equipment, which doesn't allow me to actually levitate things with the static field. I can move things and rotate with static because I'm using emitters to do that. That's what these are, these little tiny emitters on here. They're nothing special, they're just a piece of copper sticking out of with the same gauge wire. But because of that, that acts as the inertia to make it move. Now, the resonation of the static field is already moving. You'll see particles and stuff all over the floor and stuff when you flip the switch. Little things will move around, and little pieces of trash will like slide across the floor and stuff because of plastic and things like that will do that easily under those static fields. The electrons like are doing that, just like when you rub your shoes on carpet and shock somebody. It's the same kind of static electricity that's building up in the room so much it's exciting all the electrons everywhere, so it's moving little electrons around the trash and little pieces of metal, and that's why I get shocked when I won't ground myself out properly. I have this one now hooked up to my ground down here. On the outside of my house I have a grounding rod in the ground. So when you do that, you have a proper earth ground. It's not connected to my house, so I'm not worried about like shorting anything out or messing something up in my house or in here, because I'm grounding out to the earth ground outside. It actually, since I've done that, I've gotten shocked a lot less, you know, doing things in here. But there's a lot more to all this kind of stuff that's not hard. Like I said, if you want to levitate something, you're using the same concept as this, but now you need to use special antennas or kind of little radar things, in the sense of you can use coils and things like that, but a little antenna or a secondary coil like those that act like broadcasting kind of collectors and stuff, or emitters, you hook that up, and then you have to be able to play basically either sonar or very high frequencies into the resonating fields. So you have to have a setup that's pinned around the resonating fields. That's why I can't do it yet, because I was going to just build my own broadcaster with that thing right there, because this thing can build all kinds of crap, and I just kind of haven't had the time to do it. I'd rather just freaking buy the damn broadcaster, and it's like a CB broadcaster basically. I'm sure there's other ways of doing it, but to me it makes more sense that you use something that you can regulate the field and actually control it. Most people that I've seen doing a levitation or resonating fields, they're not controlling it. They're just letting it do what it's going to do, and they're not able to. I've only seen John be able to control those fields where he can slowly move something up or levitate it or move it around. I've seen people move objects and spin them around. That's easy to do. Like I said, the fields already are doing that. They're mimicking the electron itself. Information is just copying itself in this way, you know. Like if there's an electron spinning around and it's doing something, all I'm doing is resonating that field and making it bigger, you know, in that sense that they're all collecting together, they're all becoming that field. And now I'm able to emit those fields directly out the pinpoints of these little things. And then I have momentum by balancing out things and creating more spin and more rotation by other things spinning off of it. There's much more to all this. If you were to make a gear system, and the gear system functioned almost like this in that way, where each emitting things worked off of each other like that, in that sense. Like my friend Jason works on something, I always forget what it's called, but he's working on a magnetic field that uses eddy currents and stuff to rotate cylinders around magnetic fields. To me, if you were to take the static resonant in a vacuum with the same concept, you almost create a bigger giant field of resonation for those eddy currents to actually function. A little bit more, like, in a sense, you wouldn't have to use as much power to actually get all the movement to spin around. If each coil had its own emitter and used that magnetic field with it, it would spin twice as fast, I would think. And especially if you can emit frequencies into the situation that oscillate on harmonics. So if you had harmonic frequencies that worked off of each other and pulsed and pushed faster and faster and faster, but then you do it up on a sweep that oscillates those harmonics up. You create those harmonics and you can pump something faster and faster and faster. Once things are like I said, once you get a little momentum with this, it stabilizes itself and wants to control itself, you know. If something was, like I said, in a vacuum, I'd be able to control it much easier, and it wouldn't have so much resistance to it in that sense. Right now it's in competition with the oxygen and everything else in the air. There's heat coming off of this thing. All these things play elements into what kind of resonation of the field it is in right here. It's a rainy day outside. Maybe more electrons can be flowing in here if I wasn't running this heater right here. I'm sure this thing is sucking up a lot of just energy, in the sense of heat is a dispersive thing that wastes energy, consumes it. Induction coils consume wireless electricity. So like those coils up there, they just consume the current, but they won't do anything with it unless it grounds out. Let's say I hook that coil to a capacitor bank, then it would jump that current in the air to the capacitor bank. You know, if you jumped it back into the secondary coil, you will have a little spark come off of it, like you shocked yourself, but it would only work every time you recharged it. Then you have to have two capacitor banks to bounce off of each other to recharge each other, and then you can create like a loop system that way, almost. If you induct it properly, you can capture enough static in the air with a wireless current like these by creating the static resonant in the air. Like if you had a room where you can create all the static resonance in a safe manner, you could have many things in there all functioning off that one static resonation. If everything was in tune to it and all the coils were in tune to it, then everything would work properly within that room. There's not a lot of things you could probably touch in there, You would have to probably wear a nice grounding outfit or something. And everything would have to be isolated in that room completely, and you'd have to ground yourself out before you left, because you would have other currents going through you. You probably couldn't work with other people either. Most times, the situation, you probably just start shocking each other. When I've had people over and I run these kinds of things, people will touch each other and they will shock each other accidentally because of the static energy in the air, and it just automatically charges you up personally. It's kind of how all the riff machine and everything works. It's basically charging the electrons in the air, and those are being attracted to your body, charging your system up. You're creating current, which is like a pulse. You're pulsing that flow through your body. You're kind of moving all your cells and everything on a faster, more regulated pace. Goes to damaged areas and gets that blood flowing to damaged areas of the body. I mean, what do you think a bruise is? That's your blood is coagulating there to try to heal the damaged tissue. Plasma and negative ions will make blood flow faster to those things, opening up that blood flow, making it go there, especially if you hold like a static resonance, like a plasma tube or something to it. That's kind of how all this stuff in the medical field starts to work, but they're not advancing in it because of big corporations, you know. So it's much harder for them to put out things and expand on healing with frequencies and expanding those things with showing people properly how to do it, and not overcharging them. Like, all the riff machines are like freaking $3,000 for a fucking $200 mechanism inside. It's a joke, you know, that you can freaking honestly hook up a $200 Tesla coil with plasma tubes or a freaking secondary coil on there and radiate the negative ions in the air, and it's going to produce the same fucking thing. I don't care what those guys say. They're just trying to sell something, so they're not going to agree with me, you know. Of course theirs is nicer and it has a fancy box with fancy programming in it, but that's not fucking worth $3,000, you know. And anything that's going to benefit human beings should be freaking free anyways. I don't understand why people are sitting there trying to make things and build things that are supposed to be a benefit for humanity. You know, the more we sit there and try to capitalize on ourselves, the more the system wins. You try to play the game with the system, and the more that system will just beat everybody down. And I say screw that. That's why I show everybody this stuff, and I try my hardest to like do things that are like completely different, to at least show somebody that's doing these things that they can do more with what they do. You know, maybe you can't do it because you think you can't do it, but that's just bullshit, because of language is, you think you need to understand something before you actually do it, and that's bullshit. You don't need to understand shit. You just need to do it. That's the bottom line. Too many people worry about not understanding things and trying to think they need to understand something before they do it, and that's just totally wrong. You just need to do it, and then you'll understand it. It works totally the opposite than what you actually think. Now this freaking video is like freaking 38 minutes long. Great. Well, my place is fucked up. This thing is still growing. That was what it was in. And that's what it's in now. And it's forming little cavities down here on the bottom inside the blue stuff. It's hard to see it, but there's some little cavities of crystallization forming in there. They'll probably take almost like 6 months to probably evaporate all that out of there and actually make something out of it. I usually leave those things alone for a super long time, almost like 2 years, on another one I made, and that one worked out pretty cool. Yeah, this place is a disaster, man. I had this place all clean too. It's really not that bad, it just looks bad. I mean, I can barely walk around in here, but I built this thing today. I was able to actually get 3 rings to spin around freely. So I think that's a pretty good accomplishment for a few hours of trial and error, and it didn't work at first, and I said screw this, I'm going to make it work, and it did. I just have to balance it all out correctly and maybe do some modification to it to really get it going. Add this one coil on the outside to a straight coil and make this a round coil like this circle coil back here, and then just resonate those 3 circular fields around each other, and that'll create this nice rotation in here much better, even though it was working really nicely earlier. If I just start to spin that, see, it doesn't want to spin the opposite way if I try to do things. I know that because I've tried spinning things around the opposite way of the emitters, and it just will stop them and make it like not work at all. Things aren't impossible. They just take determination. They're not complicated, people. Other people make it complicated, and that's just to stop you from trying. That's because they want to sell you something. I'm not about selling anybody anything. I'm about showing people how things work, and then you take it, you go make your own thing, and you go sell it. I personally just don't give a shit about money. I need money, just like everybody else needs it, but I'm not going to try to capitalize on making things that I feel like anybody can do. I'm just doing it, so that's the difference between me and most people. I don't let anything stop me. If I don't know how to do something and my boss comes up to me and is like, Dave, do you know how to do this? I'll be like, no, but I'll learn in 5 minutes. And I do. And then I'll do that job just as professional as if he hired the professional to do it. Because I take the time out to actually look at how a professional does it. I'll watch a professional do it. And then I'll see, okay, this is not that hard. I could build this, I could do that, and then I can. Unfortunately, there's nothing like this online for me to look at, so I had to just come up with it myself and do it myself. In my head, I see much more potential to this. And I'm sure other people that understand electronics and understand static resonation could see way more in this too. There's a lot of potential here. It's just not, not all what it's all cracked out to be.